A battle for what's mine. You think you deserve that money? That trust fund belongs to Tiffany now. She's better than you'll ever be. The words from my stepmother's phone call hit me like a punch to the stomach. My fingers tightened around the edge of the hotel room desk as I tried to steady my breathing. My heart pounded in my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm. Janet's voice dripped with smug satisfaction. She had finally done what she had been trying to do for years. She had taken my trust fund. I was silent for a moment, letting the weight of her words settle. "Thanks for letting me know," I said, my voice cool and steady. I could almost hear her surprise on the other end of the line. She had expected me to cry, to beg, to scream in anger, but I gave her nothing. "That's all you have to say?" she demanded. She was waiting for me to break down. "Tiffany needs that money for her wedding and new house," Janet continued, her tone sharpening. "You're just going to waste it on your meaningless sales career." I swallowed down the bitter laugh threatening to escape. My mother, the woman who had built a successful business from nothing, had left that money to me, not for Tiffany, not for Janet, for me, to use when the time was right. And Janet had spent years trying to find a way to take it. "Is there anything else?" I asked, my voice controlled and even. Silence. I knew what she was thinking. I wasn't reacting the way she wanted. She expected a fight, a dramatic meltdown, but I had already won this battle before she even knew she was in it. What Janet didn't know was that 6 months ago, I had a meeting with Mr. Harrison, my mother's old lawyer. He had warned me about suspicious inquiries Janet had been making about the trust. Together, we had put legal safeguards in place, protections that made it impossible for anyone, especially Janet, to access the money without my approval. Her attempts to steal from me weren't just unsuccessful, they were illegal. "You've always been such a disappointment," Janet spat, trying one last time to get under my skin. "Your stepsister deserves this more than you ever did." I ended the call. Then, I exhaled slowly and turned toward the hotel window, staring out at the vast Minneapolis skyline. My hands were shaking, but not with fear. Everything was documented. Every attempt, every call, every manipulation. Janet had finally overplayed her hand. And I was ready. Returning home to face the truth, the next morning, I took the first available flight home. By the time I landed, my lawyer, Mr. Harrison, had already gathered all the documents we needed. Bank records, signatures that weren't mine, call logs, everything pointed to fraud. As I stepped into my childhood home, I found my father sitting in his usual chair in the living room, his brow furrowed as he flipped through a stack of bank statements. He looked tired, older than I remembered. "Gabriella," he said, looking up at me. "Hi, Dad." There was no warmth in the house. The tension was thick, pressing against me like a heavy weight. Janet and Tiffany were nowhere to be seen, but I could hear movement upstairs. I sat down across from my father, placing my hands on the wooden table between us. "We need to talk," I said. His eyes flickered with unease. "About what?" I slid the paperwork toward him. "About how Janet tried to steal from me, and from you." His face paled as he scanned the documents. The proof was all there, the illegal transfers, the forged signatures, the fraudulent attempts to access my trust fund. She wouldn't do this," he muttered, but the uncertainty in his voice betrayed him. I sighed. "Dad, I know you want to believe the best in her, but you need to see the truth. She's been lying to you for years." Before he could respond, footsteps thundered down the stairs. Janet appeared, her face red with anger. "You ungrateful little." I raised a hand, cutting her off. "Save it, Janet. The bank has already flagged the fraud. Mr. Harrison has filed charges. The police will be involved soon." Her eyes widened in shock before she quickly masked it with feigned confidence. "You can't do this, your father." "I'm done, Janet." My father's voice was quieter than hers, but it carried more weight. He looked up at her with something I had never seen before, disappointment. "I want you out," he said firmly, "tonight." Janet's mouth fell open. "You can't be serious." He stood, holding up the bank statements. "I trusted you, I defended you, and you stole from my daughter." Tiffany stood behind her mother, frozen, her eyes darting between us. "The police will want to speak with you," I said, my voice steady. "And Dad, there's more." I hesitated, knowing this next part would break him. "Mr. Harrison found evidence that Janet has been skimming money from your account too, small amounts over time." The color drained from his face. He sank into his chair, his hands shaking. "Get out," he whispered. "Both of you." Tiffany let out a quiet sob, but Janet wasn't done yet. "You planned this," she accused, her voice trembling with fury. "You wanted to ruin us." "No, Janet," I shook my head. "You did this to yourself." Building a new future. After Janet and Tiffany left, my father and I sat in silence for a long time. The weight of the past 12 years pressed down on us. Finally, he spoke. "I failed you," he admitted. "I let her control everything. I should have protected you." "We both made mistakes," I said. "I could have told you sooner, but I needed you to see it for yourself." For the first time in years, my father looked at me, not as the daughter he had neglected under Janet's influence, but as someone strong. In the weeks that followed, Janet faced charges for attempted fraud. She avoided jail time through a plea deal but was forced to pay back everything she had taken. Tiffany stayed in town, sending me a quiet email months later. "I'm sorry, I didn't know. I thought you had everything handed to you. I didn't realize Mom was the one trying to take from you." I wasn't sure I believed her, but I also knew she had lost everything too. Meanwhile, I used my trust fund for what my mother had always intended. I started my own business consulting firm. One afternoon, as I unpacked in my new office, my father walked in with an old, worn journal. "Your mom's business notes," he said, handing it to me. Inside, I found a letter she had written to me, just weeks before she passed away. "My dearest Gabriella, I'm leaving you more than money. I'm leaving you the freedom to choose your path. Don't let anyone dim your light. You are stronger than you know, smarter than they give you credit for, and capable of anything you set your mind to. Trust yourself, I do. Love, Mom." I framed the letter and placed it on my office wall. 5 years later, my business had expanded to 3 cities, helping other companies grow, just like my mother's had. My father came by every week for lunch, finally rebuilding the bond we had lost. The hardest lesson I learned wasn't about money or betrayal, it was about standing up for myself. My mother had prepared me for this moment long before I knew I needed it. And she was right. Standing up for what's mine, I turned to my stepsister, Tiffany, feeling a strange mix of pity and frustration. The trust fund had always been mine, but I had never used it. I worked through college, built my career from nothing, and relied on my own hard work. My mother left that money for me so I would always have options, just like she had when she built her business from scratch. But Janet, my stepmother, could never accept that, could she? She had spent years trying to control everything in my life, and now, she had tried to steal what wasn't hers. Janet's confident mask finally cracked, her face twisted with anger. "You ungrateful little." "I've already filed charges," I interrupted her, my voice calm but firm. "The bank has all the evidence of fraud. Mr. Harrison is handling everything." I turned to my father, who sat at the dining table, staring at the stack of documents in his hands. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way, Dad, but you needed to know the truth." For a long time, my father had been blind to the kind of person Janet really was. Maybe it was grief after losing my mom, or maybe it was just easier for him to believe the best in people. But now, after 12 years of manipulation, there was no hiding from the truth. His hands trembled slightly as he held the papers, evidence of her lies, her schemes, and her betrayal. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, filled with quiet anger. "Janet, I want you out of this house, tonight." Janet's eyes widened in shock. She stepped forward, her voice rising to a desperate pitch. "You can't be serious, after everything I've done for this family?" My father looked at her, really looked at her, as if seeing her for the first time, and what he saw wasn't the woman he thought he had married. "Everything you've done," he let out a humorless laugh. "You stole from my daughter, you forged my signature, you lied to me for years." Tiffany, my stepsister, started crying, but for once, it didn't seem like the fake, manipulative tears she used to get what she wanted. She looked genuinely shaken, as if she had never truly believed her mother was capable of this. I took a deep breath and turned back to Janet. "The police will want to talk to you," I said. "Mr. Harrison has already filed the reports. The bank fraud department is investigating everything." Janet's eyes darkened. "You planned this," she accused, her voice sharp and filled with venom. "No, Janet, you planned this," I said evenly. "I just made sure I was ready when you did." I glanced at my father, knowing I had to tell him everything. There's more, Mr. Harrison found proof that Janet has been skimming money from your accounts too, small amounts over the years, just enough that you wouldn't notice. The color drained from my father's face. He looked devastated. A part of me ached for him, but he had to know the truth. His voice came out hoarse. Get out. He turned his cold gaze toward Janet and Tiffany. Both of you. I'll have my lawyer contact you about the divorce. The next hour was filled with chaos. Janet shouted. Tiffany sobbed. Accusations flew, and desperate pleas followed. But in the end, they packed their things and left. As I stood by the window, the same window where I used to watch for my mother to come home from work, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. It was over. For the first time in years, I felt free. Healing and moving forward. In the weeks that followed, my father and I had long overdue conversations. One evening, we sat together in the kitchen, the same place where my mom used to help me with my homework. I failed you, my dad admitted, staring into his coffee cup. After your mom died, I was so afraid of being alone that I ignored the warning signs. I didn't see what was happening right in front of me. I sighed. We both made mistakes, Dad. I should have told you sooner, but I needed proof. I needed you to see it for yourself. The legal proceedings moved fast. Janet was charged with attempted fraud and financial exploitation. She tried to play the victim, claiming she only wanted to even things out between me and Tiffany, but the evidence was overwhelming. The bank had records of her repeated attempts to access my trust fund. Tiffany emailed me a few weeks later. She claimed she hadn't known about her mother's plans. I'm sorry, she wrote. I always thought you had everything handed to you. Mom made it seem like you were the privileged one, but now I see she was just jealous of what your mom built for you. I wasn't sure if I believed her, but I understood that she was struggling with her own painful realization. With Mr. Harrison's help, I used my trust fund to start my own business consulting firm, something I had always dreamed of but had been too cautious to pursue. My mother's hard work and legacy became the foundation of my success. During one of our meetings, Mr. Harrison smiled at me. Your mother would be proud, he said. She always told me you had her business sense and your father's heart. She knew you'd do great things when you were ready. A new chapter. My dad started coming by my office every week for lunch. We talked about my mom, remembering stories that Janet had made uncomfortable to share for years. For the first time in a long time, he looked like himself again, the father I had before everything changed. One day, while sorting through old boxes in the attic, we found my mother's business journal. Inside was a letter addressed to me, written just weeks before she passed away. My dearest Gabriella, I'm leaving you more than money. I'm leaving you the freedom to choose your path. Don't let anyone dim your light or tell you what you deserve. You are stronger than you know, smarter than they give you credit for, and capable of anything you set your mind to. Trust yourself, I do. Love, Mom. Tears filled my eyes as I read those words. I framed the letter and placed it in my office, a daily reminder of where I came from and the strength my mother had passed down to me. 5 years later, looking back now, I can hardly believe how much my life has changed. My consulting firm has expanded to 3 cities, helping businesses just like my mother's once did. The trust fund she left me didn't just secure my future, it allowed me to help others build theirs. My father retired last year, but he still comes by to mentor my employees. It keeps me connected to your mom's legacy, he says. The hardest lesson I learned wasn't about money or betrayal, it was about standing up for myself. My mother knew, even before she was gone, that one day I would have to fight for what was mine. She taught me that true strength isn't about being tough, it's about being prepared, about being patient, about waiting for the right moment. And she was right.